fallen prophet. As I've researched the term fallen prophet, I've been fascinated by the idea that never has a prophet fallen from God's grace. Looking at the New Testament, the Old Testament, even Book of Mormon prophets, there's no account of a fallen prophet. Nevertheless, the call of fallen prophet resounded throughout Kirtland and even in Missouri, where Joseph Smith now was.
The exodus of the saints from Kirtland in 1838 was a very gradual movement. People left in small groups. And in the spring of 1838, many people in Kirtland who were anxious to follow Joseph and other leaders to Missouri has hesitated in organizing. They needed help. And so the 70s decided, as probably the first major quorum project, to help the people organize and help them reach the destination of going westward and following the prophet. So subsequently, in that spring of 1838, the 70s, under the direction of Hiram Smith, created a constitution of the Kirtland camp. They invited people to sign this constitution, saying that they would work together in harmony. And then they also helped these people organize, helped them secure wagons, so that in the summer, in July 1838, 500 people gathered under the direction of the 70s. They had 59 wagons and horses and cattle. They created a wagon train unheard of in eastern United States. This is like in the West. A wagon train of 500 people prepared to cross Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois to go to Missouri.
While a handful of faithful members stayed in Kirtland, most of the Latter-day Saints followed Joseph west to Missouri. They joined saints already living in the state who had known years of persecution and upheaval. With the arrival of the prophet and the Kirtland saints, members in Missouri renewed their hope of a peaceful existence and with greater efforts began to establish permanent homes and communities.
In the fall of 1833, with the expulsion of the saints from Independence, Missouri, they crossed the river, the Missouri River, and went just a bit north into what's called Ray County, a very large county, expansive county at the time, and settled there temporarily amongst the local people. Now, as strange as it might seem, they allowed that and almost harbored them and welcomed them in a sense that, yes, we understand you've unjustly been treated over in Independence, and while you seek redress in the legal way through the law and through the court systems to see if you can be reinstated, and the paramilitary Zion's camp came in 1834 to see if they could help reinstate the saints. But sooner or later, it looked as if nothing was going to solve, quote, what was known as the Mormon problem amongst the non-LDS. These individuals, you could actually call them maybe Jack Mormons in the sense they were sympathetic towards the Mormons and their plight. One man in particular, who was a representative of Clay County for the state legislature, was Alexander Doniphan.
Alexander Doniphan proposed a bill which passed the Missouri legislature, creating two counties, Daviess County and also Caldwell County, with Caldwell County designed and designated specifically for Mormon occupation. So with the creation of Caldwell County, the latter part of 1836, Latter-day Saints living in Clay County and other surrounding counties began pouring in to Caldwell County, this now the Mormon county in Missouri.
Far west was the county seat of Caldwell County. Now, this was very important to Joseph Smith and the church. With control of the county seat, they would have control of the judges, the judicial system, the local militia. That was critical at the time. The sheriff, security. And so it became very important that Joseph have the saints gathered to Far West. There were as many as 4,000 to 5,000 saints there in the zenith of the height of Far West.
Homes, shops, businesses, hotels, all of these things began to be established. In fact, by 1839, when the Mormons leave, Far West is the largest settlement community in northern Missouri.
The fact that it was the county seat and the church had control of it, we just can't underestimate how important that was to Joseph. He began to realize this town would be unique above all other towns You see, Joseph had lived with the saints in Kirtland and Independence, where there are other people who had already lived there previously, and they mingled amongst them. But far west was going to be a town where nobody else lived, which they were going to start from scratch and build up. On March 14th of 1838, Joseph Smith arrived in Far West. He had come from the Kirtland area. He and Sidney had traveled. It took about 4 weeks for them to travel from the Kirtland down to the Missouri, and they left under duress, escaping some persecution there. When they had arrived into the Far West area, the saints were jubilant. They heard Joseph was coming, and they had lined the roads, and they were so pleased that Joseph was now going to live amongst them in Far West, Missouri.
4 significant revelations were received by the prophet Joseph Smith in Far West. One of them was what is today the law of tithing. Up until 1833, the law of consecration was lived quite effectively by the saints in Jackson County. However, between 1834 and 1838, basically the church was financed by free will offerings of the Latter-day Saints. But what is remarkable is Section 119 was given for the saints to actually implement now a program, tithing, which has essentially remained until this day.
Another important revelation was the announcement to build a temple in Far West. Wherever the saints gather, temples are built. With the temple in Far West, the revelation was specific that they were not to go into debt. However, they did proceed far enough along to dig out a dimension of which the temple was to be built and prepared to lay the cornerstones.
Joseph Smith received a revelation calling 4 new apostles. They were John Taylor, Johnny Page, Wilford Woodruff, and Willard Richards. That revelation also commanded these 4 men and the rest of the 12 to prepare themselves to go to Great Britain on April 26th, 1839. They had 9 months to get ready to go there.
Another important revelation was section 115. In this section, the church is named the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Prior to this, the church had been called the Church of Christ during the Fayette organization of the church in 1830. And in Kirtland, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, it was referred to. In Far West, it's sort of the concept of line upon line, precept on precept. Here now, the full name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, being emphasized. David Whitmer had had a problem with this. David felt that Joseph was a fallen prophet. He felt that the church had been named the Church of Christ and it shouldn't be changed. And this is one of the differences that some of these leaders were having with the prophet Joseph.
In early 1838, several prominent Latter-day Saints lost their membership in the church. This was kind of a carryover of some of the Kirtland apostasy. Significantly, however, unlike Kirtland, these men remained in and around Far West and began threatening the church leaders with vexatious lawsuits and other problems. Joseph Smith knew this could not happen in Far West like what happened in Kirtland.
If there's one thing Joseph had learned from the Jackson County experience in Kirtland that he wasn't going to allow to happen in Far West, it was that the dissenters from within the church allow them to stay in the church and live in the area. And so Joseph, one of the first things he had to do was to clean house, in a sense. For example, the state presidency of Missouri, David Whitmer, the president, John Whitmer, first counselor, and W.W. Phelps, had lost the trust of the members. W.W. Phelps and John Whitmer had bought the land in Far West at a low price and now was selling it at a high price. And this didn't sit well with the members. I don't think it would have with me either if I'd been in their situation.
These dissenters remained in Far West, but again, their influence had to be stopped. And in late June, Sidney Rigdon, first counsel in the First Presidency, delivered a sermon, now known today as the Salt Sermon. He took his text from the Matthew portion of the Gospels, in which the Savior taught that if the salt hath lost its savor, it is to be no good but trodden under by the foot of men. Basically, the message was the dissenters must leave Far West. and do so immediately. And within 2 to 3 days, the descendants